Okay, thank you, Jenna, so much. And just to be sure you can hear me, you can see me, everything's good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So just being mindful, again, I'm in my home and my cat is here. And as many cats, she wants lots of attention, but also not at the same time. So she may be coming across the screen as we're doing this. So if you do see her or hear her, she's just here. I try to keep her away, but I just, I can't control everything. We're going to do our best today. So I'm going to share my screen so everyone can see my PowerPoint. Let me see. Okay. Jenna, can you let me know if you can see the PowerPoint?
Yep, you are all good.
Okay, awesome. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to be going over vicarious trauma and how that can impact the work that we do and the care that we do or give to the victims or other people that we're working with within the community. I currently work in family services as a trauma therapist in the CVSS program. I've only been with CVSS since November, and it's been a great transition. I was at a DV&SA, Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Crisis Agency, as a child counselor in Connecticut, and decided I wanted to be more part of my own community since I am from Poughkeepsie. And I found so much value in being part of this community, especially being part of family services. So today we're going to be learning about types of impacts on providers. There's definitely different nuances and different terminology, but we're going to go through that and define those. Understanding the signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma, how it affects the work that we do, the risk factors, but also protective factors to their vicarious trauma, and how to enhance those protective factors, which is truly so important to the work that we do. Okay. So I'm a very visual learner, so I like to start off with a Venn diagram, just showing the intersections of different components of what could be affecting us as caregivers. So there could be someone who might be experiencing primary trauma stress or PTSD symptoms, things like that. So understanding the difference between primary traumatic stress versus secondary or vicarious stress. So primary, for example, is someone who, say, you get into a car accident and you are the one that experiences that trauma firsthand, versus secondary, perhaps you're telling a caregiver, a therapist, a friend, someone else about that trauma that you experienced, and maybe that person is hearing those stories that you're sharing and being impacted by them. So just as people who are in primary positions of trauma, there's also the secondary victims who are trying to support that person who's going through the experiences of the primary trauma. So even though you might not be directly involved in something, you're still being impacted. So having that understanding. Other factors that could be affecting us is compassion fatigue. We'll get more into that, and burnout, and seeing the intersections of all these things. So though they're very similar, again, they have like minor differences or take on a different flavor, if you will. And also understanding the effects of the vicarious trauma can be gradual and can be nearly unconscious process. So just as someone who might be experiencing PTSD, you might have your traumatic experience, but then you might not be showing signs and symptoms of what has happened until maybe 3 to 6 months later, because initially maybe things, you have to go through the motions and the shock of whatever the trauma is initially, but then as things settle, then your body and your mind and your soul might be responding to those things differently. So the impacts of everything defined. So we might have our secondary traumatic stress. So this is, if I can see better, because some of the screen can't fully see it. So let me try to move the chat just so I can read everything properly. Okay, so secondary traumatic stress. This is emotional duress that results in an individual hears the first-hand trauma experience of another. Again, so if you get into a car, someone gets into a car accident, then you're hearing their story of being in that car accident. And this can accumulate and then cause someone to experience symptoms that mimic post-traumatic stress disorder. And as we're going through all the different signs and symptoms, I will point out things that are also related to PTSD. So keeping in mind what those symptoms are and if you are in fact experiencing vicarious trauma. So compassion fatigue is the cumulative physical, emotional, and psychological effects of exposure to traumatic stories or events when working in a healthy capacity, combined with the strain and stress of everyday life. So again, very similar, but this one is focusing in on also the things that we might be doing at home. So perhaps we're having stories or working with victims in our work, but then maybe things at home or in our personal life, there might be a lot of stress going on. So then that could be impacting us and our ability to do the work or working with the people or just having relationships in general. And then there's vicarious trauma. So this is a cognitive shift in beliefs about oneself and one's view about issues that might be affecting maybe our sense of safety, our trust, and our control. And then this is due to the repeat exposure of traumatic material. So again, hearing about a particular horrible event might compromise our trust or faith in humanity. So for example, something that we might have traumatic or vicarious trauma to is different school shootings and exposure to that. And that's something that could directly impact our community due to gun violence within our own community. So there's this shift of constant exposure to those things. And then we also have burnout. And I put a little star next to burnout because this is something that you don't necessarily need to be in a care providing profession to experience burnout. So this is something, okay, let me just try to move this little screen so I can properly read, which I don't know if I can or not. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. It can occur when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and unable to meet constant demands. As the stress continues, you begin to lose interest and motivation that led you to take on a certain role in the first place. So again, this could be someone who might be a teacher or someone who works in a restaurant or sales or retail or any other kind of field. If there's just prolonged stress, and that could be within the workplace in addition to things that might be happening in your personal life, and that's just going to take a toll on your mind, your body, and your soul, which then can move you away from, okay, why did I get myself into this position? Why, what is my why, essentially, at the end of the day, was what led me to this journey to take on this role, and I'm losing sight of my why. Okay. I'm having a little difficulty transitioning the slide. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Okay, so understanding the signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma, and now throughout the entire training, I'm going to just use the term vicarious trauma because as we learned, there's so many different terminology, but we're just going to focus on this term itself. So there can be emotional, behavioral, physiological, there's cognitive, there's relational, there's so many different signs and symptoms to look out for. So in terms of emotional, we might be feeling grief or guilt or sadness based on what we're hearing. And especially people who are in a caretaker role or working with people in the community who have experienced many traumas, you know, we might have a lot of empathy for those people. And when you have empathy for someone, you might start to take on or really feel the feelings that the person is feeling, especially as they're telling you a story or their experience with their trauma. So you too can start to take on that grief or that guilt or that sadness, depending on what the situation is. And this in turn can cause someone to start to feel irritable or angry. You might be more sensitive to different things. You might start to feel anxious or hopeless or powerless, becoming distracted, or just intense moods and shifts. Or maybe maybe you were experiencing or someone who enjoys humor, and maybe you're not finding things to be as funny anymore and just losing that sense of joy. severe emotional distress, or you're experiencing severe emotional distress or physical reactions to reminders of trauma, or you might start to feel generally unsafe. And a lot of these things that I just mentioned are things that someone who has experienced trauma firsthand or has PTSD might have these feelings, especially if you're exposed to something or you have reminders, intrusive memories or thoughts or images that then cause you to have emotional distress or physical reactions to the trauma, just as someone who might have experienced it firsthand. So for behavioral, we might see that we're consuming more alcohol or different substances to try to cope with the trauma that we are enduring for others. Maybe we're more hypervigilant, our eating habits are changing. So that could be either we're eating a lot, or maybe we're not eating enough, and maybe we're not eating the things to properly fuel our bodies. We might, again, going along with like hypervigilance, we might get startled easily because we're constantly scanning, we're constantly on edge to be like, okay, are we in a safe situation? What's going on in my surroundings? And that can show up as having difficulty sleeping, so many different things. And you might start to, again, if we're increasing alcohol or substances, maybe we're also engaging in risky behaviors, or we're avoiding people or tasks that might be difficult. And we might also have a hard time taking on, our role at work versus personal life. So those things are intersecting and we're not able to separate the two. And we can also be having physiological reactions to this. So maybe we're having headaches or more fatigued, or again, we might be losing weight or gaining weight, sleep disturbances. And on the another realm, we could be getting ulcers or rashes or heartburn, different things physiologically. And because of stress, this can impair our immune system. So therefore, we could just become more sick more often. And again, because maybe we're not fueling our bodies and our bodies aren't getting the things that they need, our basic needs met in terms of like food or sleep and things like that. And I think it's important too, as vicarious trauma is maybe something that is gradual, something that is maybe unconscious, is really tuning into those physiological things first. Because sometimes we notice those changes first before maybe emotional or other changes within ourselves. So maybe we're noticing that we're having a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep, or that we are engaging in more risky behaviors, or we're having pains, or depending on where you hold your stress within your body, maybe that's increasing as well. So sometimes those are things to take note and really assess, like, okay, what's going on with me internally and how am I being impacted? Maybe it is work that's impacting me and that's why I'm getting sick, or any of these symptoms. So furthermore, we might have cognitive or spiritual or relational symptoms. So cognitive, maybe we're more cynical, we're having more negative self-talk, or having difficulty concentrating or remembering things or making decisions. And that could be in terms of work or life or both. And it might be hard to stop thinking about the trauma that other people have experienced, especially depending on the information that they're providing, or the duration or severity of the trauma that they're sharing. That can impact us differently. But it's a hard time sometimes just shutting that off, because it might stay with us throughout the day, even if we are transitioning. And I think too, as we're all working from home, trying to be even more mindful of that, because not all of us either have that walk or that bus ride or that drive home to kind of separate and delay that. So trying to be mindful of that as we're working from home currently during this pandemic, as we're giving this presentation. And you might have racing thoughts or recurring or unwanted distressing thoughts. So again, showing those symptoms of PTSD. So in terms of spirituality, maybe that can include loss of hope, or decreased sense of purpose, or feelings of connection with others in the world in general. Just losing sight of purpose, or just like feeling unworthy of love or not deserving of love. And again, going back to like burnout, just the example I gave there is, maybe our why and our drive in life isn't necessarily there as it might have been before. And in terms of a relational, maybe we are withdrawn from our loved ones. This might be a decrease in intimacy or sex, especially depending on the work that you're doing, especially if you're working with a lot of survivors of a sexual abuse or assault. That could definitely impact things. Minimizing others' concerns or projecting anger or other things like that, or intolerance or mistrust onto others. And I think too, when you're working in a field where you're working with other people who have experienced trauma, sometimes when it comes to different concerns, or if we want to term them like first world problems or complaints, maybe you're not going to attune to that as much as, you know, say someone who is being abused or is homeless, or, you know, experiencing so many different things in the world that you're just like, okay, come on, like those other things aren't really worthwhile. But understanding that, you know, everyone has different life experiences. So sometimes we might minimize what other people are experiencing based on what we're doing at work. Okay, let me see. For some reason, oh, there we go. Okay, so additional signs and symptoms. So again, we might be chronically exhausted, and taking note of the difference between emotional exhaustion or physical exhaustion, or you might be feeling both. So again, being in tune with that and trying to understand within ourselves, okay, where is this coming from? How can I help myself with this? And again, going back to the relational thing, is producing feelings of sympathy or empathy for others, or even for yourself. Dreading work or taking care of another and feeling guilt as a result. And knowing that, okay, tomorrow I have to do this, and that, and I just don't want to. But then in turn, knowing that, okay, I still have to step up, I still have to show up for this, and it's still important, but now I'm feeling guilt because, you know, internally I'm in turmoil. Feeling inadequate towards a therapeutic or caregiver relationship. So really putting yourself down, thinking that you're not enough, or what you're bringing to the table for your client or whoever you're taking care of isn't enough, or you're not, you know, just again, all the feelings of inadequacy. But in reality, you're probably doing a lot more than you know. You try to give yourself credit for that. Another sign might be dissociation. So this is a very common sign for someone who has PTSD. And to some degree, we all dissociate in some way, like daydreaming. If you're sitting in a meeting or if you're in a class or something like that, and your mind just wanders for a moment, you know, that's okay, but then you're able to bring it back. And some people who are having dissociations may not necessarily be able to do that. Or you might become absorbed with something, or kind of zoning out in a way, or feeling as if your body is not your own, or just completely forgetting things, or being in like amnesia fugue or something like that. There's so many different ways that dissociation can come up for different people. And again, going back to the signs and symptoms of a poor to work-life balance. It's very huge. Okay, so going into how vicarious trauma affects our work. So performance-wise, maybe we're experiencing low quality of work, low motivation, avoiding tasks. Maybe you're like, okay, I'm supposed to call that one client back today, but I'm going to just put it off to tomorrow. And knowing that, you know, I really should be calling them today, but I just can't bring myself to do so. Or I can't get this paperwork done, or something like that. Obsession with details. Maybe you're working too hard or setting those perfectionist standards, when in reality, nothing can ever be perfect. And we have to allow ourselves to know that. But this is coming from a place of like, you know, having a loss of control, and wanting to gain more control. So then we're trying to kind of flip it to being a perfectionist standard, which then in turn hurts us, especially when we're not able to fully achieve that perfection that we might be searching for. So again, giving ourselves that permission to have everything not perfect, and that's okay. Doing your best. Again, having difficulty with attention and being forgetful. So maybe switching up, maybe you're supposed to have a meeting and you switch the days or something like that, which it's okay. We all are very busy, And that's why I know I rely on my calendar so much, because then I could be forgetful, but, you know, just like completely forgetting what day it is or things like that, you know, more heightened forgetfulness. So morale, a decrease in confidence or interest or activity, attitude, apathy, just being dissatisfied, demoralized, feeling undervalued and unappreciated, and just like disconnected and reducing compassion. This is why it's so important, at least at CDSS, when we do have our all staff meetings, we do try to focus on the good that's happening. And that could be within work or within our own personal lives, and just having that importance of focusing on the good, because especially when we're working with people who have experienced trauma, you know, we can so easily just focus on all the negative and all of the barriers and all of those things, you know, which, you know, we do have to focus on those things, but also focusing on the good, and finding value in what we're doing. So in terms of other things affecting our work is behaviorally. Maybe we're calling out more, arriving late to work. Maybe we're overworking, not leaving when we're supposed to be working, you know, I just have to finish this one thing and I can't wait till tomorrow, when in reality it can. And I do understand sometimes things do come up where there are emergencies or crises that you do have to attend to, but understanding, you know, it's okay to let things go for the day and go home and recharge, and, you know, tomorrow is another day. And then this could be leading to exhaustion, just irresponsibility. Maybe your judgment is off because of everything else that's going on with the vicarious trauma, and just poor follow through. And again, for relational, maybe you're detached or withdrawn from coworkers. There's poor communication. Maybe there's more conflict because of more irritability, having that impatience with a client, maybe because of, you know, they're experiencing their own trauma, so maybe things aren't flowing as the way that we would want them to, but we're being impacted by our own various vicarious trauma, so we're getting more impatient, intolerable, and things like that. Or you might also take on the sense of, again, going back to like the perfectionist thing, is like, I'm the only one who can do this job, when in fact we have this huge agency and huge support networks, and understanding that you're not alone and things shouldn't just be on your shoulders. So having, you know, being mindful of, if you're thinking like, I can only do this, no one else can do this, being mindful of that. So risk factors that can impact either increasing or decreasing the likelihood of us experiencing vicarious trauma. So from a personal aspect, maybe you have your own trauma history. And as we may know, if the more trauma that you're being exposed to, that can increase your risk of having PTSD or vicarious trauma. So those are things to think of. Pre-existing psychological disorders, because again, something might be off for yourself psychologically, so therefore I'm more at risk of being vulnerable to having different trauma experiences or experiencing those traumas in a negative way. Maybe if you're isolating or you have an inadequate support system, because again, as humans, we are huge social people and having our connections are huge, but if we're isolating ourselves and not allowing ourselves to engage or reach out, then, you know, we're going to have, we might be at risk of having more negative outcomes. If you have the difficulty of expressing your feelings because you're not able to verbalize or show how you're feeling, and you're again keeping it internally, then that could be causing concerns too. Having poor boundaries, not being able to say no, not being able to leave work at work. Of course, again, we're in times, as we're doing this presentation, we're in a pandemic, so we're always home. So again, it's important to try to find those boundaries as much as possible, which can be, you know, difficult at these times, but trying to do your best that you can. Another huge factor that research has shown is if you've had a loss in the last 12 months. So again, you're going through your own grieving and your own experiences and then taking on the trauma of others as well. So professional risk factors, lack of quality supervision, again, feeling like you're alone and maybe you don't have necessarily that supervisor to turn to. A high percentage of trauma survivors in caseload. As a trauma therapist, everyone I'm working with is experiencing trauma. So that could definitely take a toll. And again, being mindful of that. And being able to go to your supervisor if you're able to, or talking to coworkers about the things that you're experiencing with your high trauma caseload. Maybe you are, well, it says little experience. So maybe you're new to the field and maybe you don't have all the tools and the wisdom that maybe someone who's been in the field for a longer period of time. And you know, that isn't saying that you're inadequate or anything like that. It's just learning the ropes, gaining more knowledge and going through more trainings and things like that. But I'm sure people who are coming into this field already have a solid foundation, and you're hopefully getting adequate trainings before really jumping in and getting your feet wet within working in this field. Maybe the worker and the organization is not a good fit. Maybe the work that you're striving for and your why isn't fitting with the why of the agency that you're working with. So maybe taking time to find another agency, organization, or maybe starting your own organization that matches really what your mission is in life. Again, for boundaries. Boundaries are huge, and needing to be mindful of those, and you know, really in tuning to what your needs are and what you're willing to take on and what you're not willing to take on. It's okay to say no to things, especially if you're not comfortable with them. Lack of professional support, again, that's just huge. If that's coming from a supervisor or your cohort of whoever you're working with, if you're not receiving that support that you feel like you need, then you know, this is going to put you at risk. And again, inadequate orientation training, so important to get that, to get your bases covered before really getting your feet wet, especially when you're working with people who experience trauma. So protective factors, we're going to get all into this. We're going to go over workplace supports, education and training on vicarious trauma is a huge protective factor. Resiliency, vicarious resiliency, and self-care routines. So these are all different huge protective factors that to know and understand. And also, just for our note, as we're seeing the education on vicarious trauma, there is a great resource called the Vicarious Trauma Toolkit. And that is a link, but you can also search in your web browser Vicarious Trauma Toolkit, and that should be the first thing that comes up. And there are so many great links and trainings and just information for vicarious trauma, and that there are specific trainings or tools and different things to grab at for people who are working with crime victims or victim services. So there's a whole section on just that for people who are EMTs or EMS workers. And then there's a section for people who are law enforcement or firefighters and people that are taking on those roles. There's different tools and things to gather from on this site. So definitely taking the time to go and look through that. Very beautiful and such a great resource. So workplace supports, huge as we're going over. If you don't have good workplace supports, that's going to put you at higher risk of having vicarious trauma and all of those things. So what can we do for the ones that we work with, for our coworkers? What can we do to help the people that we're working with, especially if someone's in a place of having vicarious trauma? It might be harder for them to reach out for help because maybe they're just feeling so in the hole that they can't reach out, and sometimes we just need to reach a hand into that hole to try to help pull that coworker out and just give them the support that they need. So what are we going to look for? You know, reaching out and talking to them individually about the impact of the work, understanding that what we're hearing is, you know, it's a lot, and taking on that emotional toll for others, it can really take a toll on us, and that's okay. And just being able to talk freely about that with your coworkers, of course, being mindful of confidentiality and HIPAA and all those things, you know, when you're talking about your client, especially when we're working from home, so many different ways of communicating. And that could be either just like through a text or using Teams, when you're in meetings and things like that, just, you know, being able to have that space and feeling secure to talk about what's going on and what you're experiencing with your clients. Helping a coworker establish a consistent work to home transition that creates the important boundaries. Boundaries are huge, and safe place outside the workplace. So again, try not to bring those things home with us. Again, we're working from home, but trying to find those boundaries. I'll be like, okay, this time I'm going to go for a walk with my family, or from this time to this time, I'm just gonna watch TV and decompress, or I'm gonna exercise and focus on me, and then maybe I'll go back to doing work, especially as we're trying to find that balance from work from home. Again, engaging or encouraging your coworkers to attend the basic needs. So that's sleep, eating healthier, hygiene, and exercise, all those things. Just trying to do your best with like taking care of yourself and your basic needs can be so huge, and just really shift a change within yourself when we're not feeling the best. Supporting connections with maybe family, friends, and other coworkers, or if you're seeing a coworker struggle, referring them to organizational supports, let me see, such as a peer support team or the employee assistant program, which we'll get into. And encouraging them to discuss their experience with their supervisor. So not just one-on-one with a coworker, we're also going to higher ups to try to get the guidance and the needs met. Okay. So suggestions for supervisors, and this is also to be mindful of, is that if you are a supervisor, that is different than someone who, say, another therapist or a caseworker or someone else. That person is working directly with their clients, but they have a specific case pulled. As a supervisor, you have many people coming to you with many different stories of different clients and their needs and everything like that, which can be very difficult, a lot of burdens. So you're not just hearing like, someone maybe have a caseload of 20 to 30 or more, but you're also taking on, each person's caseload and hearing those stories. So as a supervisor, making sure that you're really taking care of yourself so that you can provide to your employees. So suggestions for supervisors: discussing vicarious trauma as part of supervision. So understanding what vicarious trauma is, noticing, okay, this one particular case is really taking a toll on me. Like, this is how it's making me feel, or when this client leaves, or I'm done working with this client, this is what I'm feeling, and this is what I'm experiencing. And when I'm home, I'm bringing work home with me. So having that within supervision. Allowing flexible work schedules, reorganizing the need for and protecting downtime while staying in tune to the possibility of withdrawal or isolation. So again, we need to be able to fill our own cups so that we can help others. And again, not allowing our employees to overwork themselves. And if they are going over their hours, making sure they're either flexing those hours or getting compensated for those hours that they're working overtime, and checking in with them if you do notice someone is working too much, or if they're working too little, kind of checking in, be like, okay, what's happening? How can I support you? Taking a sip of water. Creating time and physical space at work for reflection through reading, writing, prayer, or meditation, and other activities. So really encouraging different forms of wellness, and not just being like, okay, it's work, work, work. Like, let's really reflect. And this is great if you have all staff meetings, taking maybe 5-10 minutes to do something that can be reflective and can help us to calm and just regain focus. And referring to therapeutic or professional assistance when appropriate, especially if someone is, becoming very overwhelmed and are experiencing more symptoms of vicarious trauma. How can I support them, but also refer you to other professionals to help you at this time? And just as we're doing now, engaging staff in vicarious trauma and how to cope with that. So you guys are already ahead of the game if you're part of this, because you're learning what vicarious trauma is. You're being attuned to what the signs and symptoms are and what you can do about them to protect yourself, or how to reach out for help if you are experiencing this currently. And again, there's no shame in doing that. We take on a lot of work. So, you know, having this is huge. So moving forward. Again, said I was going to talk about more of this. So at Family Services, we are so fortunate to have the Employee Assistant Program. And this is something that is free to family service workers, where if you are going through vicarious trauma or other family concerns, or maybe you're dealing with substance concerns or legal concerns, anything that is like that, you have that additional support free for family service employees, so really taking advantage of that when you do need that help. And information is here. So if you do not have it already, that is the phone number that you can call if you do need that additional support whenever you may need it, or you don't need it, but it's there. You can also find this within the employee handbook, or if you feel comfortable reaching out to HR, they of course have this information, or supervisors should have this information. So it is readily available if you don't have a moment to write it down right now. Now going into further factors of supporting and building our protective factors is understanding resiliency. Now my supervisor Tina, she will be giving a training on resiliency, I believe next Monday. I could be wrong, but I think her training is coming up soon. So we're just going to go over resiliency very briefly. So resiliency is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. And that could be family relationship problems, serious health problems, or work and financial stressors. Resiliency means bouncing back from difficult experiences. And in life, especially with everything going on currently in our world, there's always going to be something. Life's never going to be 100 smooth sailing all the time. You know, we're going to have our peaks and flows, our valleys, our peaks, different things like that, where we are going to be faced with different challenges. And building our resiliency is going to be able to increase our ability to face those concerns, to try to problem solve and bounce back and not be overly consumed with the threats or the trauma or the tragedies. Sometimes can feel overwhelming, but working on this is huge. Okay, so ways to boost our resiliency. There's so many different ways to boost our resiliency. First and foremost is finding a sense of purpose in your life. Again, going back to like finding your why. What is my mission? What is meaningful to me? I think a lot of us come into this field for a specific reason, and that could be because we want to help others, we want to give back to the community. Again, some people come into this field because of their own experiences and they want to help others, which is so helpful for some people when they have those firsthand experiences, especially those within, I know, in the SNUG program, you know, giving back to the community and being able to reach out to those within our community and help support and just build. Build positive beliefs about your abilities. So if we're constantly in the rut or in the self-criticism, having that negative self-talk, we're going to just deplete ourselves and really push ourselves down. So trying to find your strengths and your accomplishments, even if it's something so small, like, you know, a client came and they smiled. Like that can be a huge accomplishment, especially for someone who might be really down and out right now. Or something could be just like in tuning with others, or maybe you're really good at organizing, or maybe you're really good at public speaking, and just like finding those accomplishments, or, you know, all those strengths that are within yourself. And sometimes we just need to remind ourselves of that daily. Just as we bathe daily, we need to give ourselves affirmations daily as well, and just trying to boost our morale. Again, we're social creatures, so we need to try to develop a strong social network, and that could be within our workplace, within our community, faith-based, or at home, wherever we can try to connect with others to have that good support system. And embracing change. Again, there is so much change going on in the world, in our daily lives. There's always something to kind of try to adapt to and change is inevitable. Some people do not like change, which is totally understandable, but we need to try to learn to be flexible and adapt to change to the best of our abilities. And trying to be optimistic. I'm not saying this is something where you need to be all rays and sunshine and constantly happy, constantly optimistic, because we don't always have the ability. Just as the weather changes, our moods and our behavior changes as well. But trying to take on that more positive perspective, understanding that their setbacks are temporary, and there's going to be obstacles in life, but we just have to problem solve and really try to figure out, how can I overcome this obstacle? And then once you do, just giving yourself that phase of that accomplishment. Nurturing yourself, self-care. We have a whole section on self-care, but knowing that it's something that we do need to do that daily. And self-care looks so different for so many different people, but just taking time to recharge your batteries and really focus on nurturing yourself and what your needs are. And this is something where we don't have to go off to a spa day or a spa weekend or something like that. We don't need to have this huge retreat. Self-care could be just meditating or just being silent for 5 minutes or even 3 minutes, going for a walk, having a good meal, just maybe chatting with a friend, watching that cute video that Brian sent to all of us of those babies hugging, just like cute little things like that. I really did appreciate that. So finding those moments to take care of yourself. Developing your problem solving skills, again, really thinking, strategizing, even with common problems of just like, okay, what can I do with this situation? If plan A doesn't work, what could plan B be? And just understanding that, again, changes can happen. Outcomes aren't always what we think it's going to be, especially when you're working at CVSS. Maybe there's different things that pop up throughout your day that you're like, okay, how can I problem solve this? Or how can I figure this out? And this is also good when you're trying to gather with your social networks or going to your supervisor or coworker and trying to talk a case out and try to like take from their experience and moving forward with that. Establishing goals, set reasonable goals. As we know, maybe we want so many different things in life, and in order to get a PhD or a master's, it's not like overnight it's going to happen. You do your different schooling. You're like, the next step is I have to apply for this. The next step is I have to go for the interview. All these little things of just breaking things down in manageable steps so that you can achieve your goals. And again, being adaptive. Maybe each step isn't going to go like straight according to plan, but trying to manage that to the best of your ability. And taking action to solve problems, not just like sitting around and just being like, oh, this is it, nothing I can do. Just trying to do your best to feel more in control of the situation, trying to work on a solution. And keep working on your skills. Like engaging in these educational experiences is huge, especially when we don't know what we don't know until we know. So really working on your skills and your abilities so that you can overcome. So with vicarious trauma, there's also something called vicarious resilience. So vicarious resilience is the professional experience of personal growth in their own life through witnessing the healing and recovery and resilience of their clients. So we might get clients who are coming in, and I've heard this so many times, and I've seen it so many times where, you're just like, oh my God, this person has experienced so much trauma in their life, is going through so much, and they're just very overwhelmed and they don't know where to turn to. And, here they are, and how am I going to help this person? How am I, like, all these different things might run through our mind, and those self-doubts, and really trying to figure out, oh my God, am I really up to par to help this person? And this is, again, why it's so important to break down goals with clients, or goals for ourselves professionally or personally, and being able to see, okay, we're not gonna build Rome in a day. This might take time, and that's okay. But seeing those subtle changes in a client, seeing someone, they finally got their housing, and that's so huge, or they finally got their job, or maybe they were able to sleep through the night without waking up with nightmares. They have a smile on their face. There's so many different things that can happen that you're just seeing this person heal and recover, which is huge for the work that we do, especially for sometimes we have clients who just, fly off the radar. We don't know what happened. We don't have any answers. But being able to hold on to those good wins. And let's see, other impacts of the vicarious resiliency is a greater perspective and appreciation for our own problems, being more optimistic, motivated, infectious, and re-energized, because you're like, okay, I did it, made another day, like I'm making a difference, I'm able to help, and I'm seeing this happen before my eyes. Increased sense of hope, understanding, and belief in the possibility of recovery from trauma and other serious challenges, and profound sense of commitment and finding meaning in the work. So again, we're all coming here for a reason, because we want to make change. We want to have a positive impact. No, I don't feel like anyone comes into this work because we're just like, oh, doom and gloom, and I just want to see all this pain. It's, we want to try to make change within the world. Again, going back to self-care. Self-care is so, so important. And self-care is what people do for themselves to establish and maintain health and to prevent and deal with illness. Any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional, and physical health, although it's a simple concept in theory, sometimes it can be easily overlooked. Example is I had a client where we were talking about self-care, and that was something that was hard for them because of time, and they felt that they were only doing self-care things to try to distract themselves as a form of coping. But understanding that self-care is like coping and building those coping skills, but it's something that we have to do daily to really keep us on track, to really attune to our needs and improve our moods and reduce anxiety. And it's also key to good relationships with ourselves and others. So a good self-care regimen will look different for each person, but it should generally include balanced, nutritious diet, again, like our mental health and our physical health, one and the same. Mental health is just brain health. Our brain is part of our body. And if we're fueling ourselves with a good diet, that is really going to have a huge impact on our physical and mental health. Trying to have regular exercise. I'm not saying that you have to go to the gym and you got to go lift a million weights. That could even look like doing yoga or doing chair yoga if you're differently abled, going for a walk or a stroll, or so many different things, a bike ride. Just getting, if that means taking 5 minutes to dance around in your room, or just anything that fits your needs. Routine schedule of restful sleep. So trying your best to have that schedule of, okay, I'm going to go to sleep at 11, I'm going to wake up at 7, like this is what I need to do to keep myself on track. If our sleep schedules are all over the place, then that's going to impact our mood and so many other factors. Again, the balance between work and leisure, just being able to try to separate work from home and having that. And something former coworker of mine, something that they told me that they do is when the workday is over, they imagine themselves with like some type of work hat on, whatever that might represent to them. And imagine themselves taking that hat off, putting it aside, and then putting on a different hat that represents, their work from, or their personal life hat. So maybe like a moment like for Mr. Rogers. So like, he walks in, he changes his shoes, he changes into like his cardigan, he's switching that up from coming outside into his life, and, having that transition, which I think is such a huge and a beautiful visual impact of Mr. Rogers. If you have not seen Mr. Rogers, I highly recommend looking into the introduction of Mr. Rogers, or even him ending the show. It was a beautiful show. And again, honoring our emotional needs, not putting aside that, like, if we're feeling a certain way, that's okay. And just, you know, really attuning to what our emotional needs are and not ignoring them. So, professional self-care, taking time for lunch. Let's repeat it together. Take your lunch. Take your lunch. This is so hugely important. And I know sometimes we can get into the rut where it's like, okay, I just have to write these notes. I'm just going to eat at my desk. I'm just going to be here. But even just taking your hour lunch can really regenerate and just like energize you so much, and really attuning to those needs. That could look like, even if you're not leaving the office, maybe you're reading a book, or you're just going on your phone and going on YouTube, watch funny videos, something, you know, anything like that. And sometimes we could get in the space of, well, you know, there's so many other things I have to do or I have to get done. But if we're not attuning to that time for ourselves, we're gonna get burnt out. We're gonna experience vicarious trauma, and we're not going to be able to give our full selves if we're not taking time for ourselves. Taking time for yourself is not selfish, it's selfless, so that you can do your job and to help others to really continue to fuel your why and your mission. And also, you're not getting paid. I'm just going to throw that out there, especially if you're in a field where you're not getting paid overtime. That is your sacred time for yourself, and that's okay. Setting boundaries, not working outside of work hours. If you're working 9 to 5, that does not mean you're coming home or opening your computer again at 6. Setting those times for yourself so that it's like, okay, this is the time for work, this is my time for play. Again, trying to leave your work at work, using that visualization, trying to maybe take that image or whatever the work day has brought, and trying to visually see it like go into a drawer at work or something like that, just to try to leave work at work to the best of your ability. And again, do not work on your time off. That is your time off, your vacation time, personal time, weekend, if that's within your schedule. Just leave work at work. So many other things. The work that we do is so important, but you are also very important, and your time for yourself is very important. And not taking on more than you can handle. Being able to say no. It's okay to set boundaries. You don't have to be a superhero. If you're being overworked, again, you're not going to be able to focus on what you really have to do. And receiving proper supervision, again, huge. If you're not receiving the supervision that you need, or not reaching out to the best of your abilities, you know, it's really important to have a good supervisor. And if that need's not being met, reaching out to other resources so that you can get that proper supervision. And taking mental health days, just like taking your lunch break. If you're feeling overwhelmed, we have some time, you got that time accumulated, take it, especially if you need it. That is okay. Because again, if you are not recharged, if you're not at your best, we're not going to be able to be our best to helping others. And take all your vacation days. I know we live in America. I know we're very work focused, but let's just pretend that you live in Europe and you're just like, I'm just gonna, or if you live in Spain, you're like, I'm just gonna take my siesta. Just really focusing on you time to recharge. And this is also a lovely self-care quiz. It's not like a BuzzFeed quiz. It is based on research. It's the Skopal Practitioner Professional Resiliency and Self-Care Inventory. If I said his name or her name correctly, I do not know, but here we are. And I just wanted to take a moment to try to look at this. I do know that I have it. Just do not know how to get out of this screen. Oh, let me see. Well, we're running out of time anyways, but if you do search for this inventory, it is so great because it really goes through different scales of, okay, what are you attuning to, what are you not attuning to? And then it also has different questions for you to focus on, to really ask yourself, okay, what can I attune to more? What am I doing for myself? What am I not doing for myself? And trying to find a better balance within your self-care. And again, visual and just having that different aspects of self-care could mean a lot of different things. So that could be physical, psychological, emotional, spiritual, personal, and professional. Looking into those different modalities that you can use for self-care. And just ending this session with a quote, because I love quotes. Just saying, yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I am wise, so I'm changing myself. So just a reminder that, you know, some of us want to take over the world, but we can't always take over the world, but just finding what we can control within ourselves. And this is just my information. If you have additional questions or comments or anything to reach out, feel free to reach out to me, Mem O'Connor at FamilyServicesNY.org. And I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I hope that it was fruitful for you, and thank you for joining us today. And I look forward to so many more presentations. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, well, I have a few moments if you wanted to send them in the chat. Feel free. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you, Erin. Again, I'm just here if anyone has questions, but you may leave if you do not have any. You are all welcome. Okay, I think that is that. And thank you, Jenna, for your help with everything.